Have you ever considered, my friends, that your life is not the whole book, but only a single chapter within it? Indeed, it is a humbling thought that even the longest earthly life is but a page in the vast narrative God is writing. When we attempt to make sense of suffering, joy, or even the strange interruptions of life, we often err because we are reading our own chapter as if it were the whole story. Imagine pausing in the middle of a novel at the darkest moment and concluding that all is lost, when in truth the climax is yet to come, and the resolution is already secured by the author's hand. We are characters, yes, but more than that, we are beloved children whose story is caught up in something immeasurably larger than ourselves, the great story that God Himself is telling. When I reflect upon the mystery of existence, I find myself most struck by this. We live our days as though we are the main authors of our tale, and yet, at the end, it is another's ink that has been guiding the pen all along. This realization is both unsettling and profoundly comforting. It is unsettling because it robs us of the illusion of control, comforting because it assures us that our small and seemingly fragile lives are being woven into a tapestry beyond imagination. Consider, for example, the moments of joy that come upon us suddenly, like a melody played in the distance. These flashes of delight, when beauty overwhelms us, or love pierces us, or the laughter of a child melts our defenses, are not isolated accidents. They are hints of a larger narrative, little foretastes of the banquet yet to come. They are the bright sentences in the chapter, pointing toward the author's final intention. Likewise, our sorrows must also be read in this light, for what seems like tragedy within the limits of one chapter may, in the completed story, prove to be the very path by which redemption entered. If one were to open the Divine Comedy and read only the Inferno, despair would surely seize the reader. Yet, when endured to the end, one sees that Paradise crowns the work. So it is with our own experience. To judge the meaning of life only by today's burdens is to misunderstand the book we are in. Now, it is natural for us to ask, why must we endure such waiting? Why are we not granted the whole manuscript now? I believe it is because the author wishes us not merely to observe, but to live, to choose, to walk freely in the path set before us. If we saw the ending clearly, we would cease to grow. Faith is the posture of one who trusts that the hand of the writer is steady, even when the plot twists are bewildering. In truth, our greatest mistake lies in imagining that the story ends with death. That, my dear friends, is but the closing of a single volume. The next book begins when we pass through that mysterious door, and it is a book in which each chapter will be better than the one before. Earthly life, with all its joys and griefs, is merely the prologue. All the feasts here, all the loves, all the adventures, are the faintest echoes of the banquet that has no end. Do not imagine that this belittles our present life. On the contrary, it enlarges it. For if my laughter here is but the shadow of greater joy, then my laughter is sanctified. If my tears here are but seeds of glory, then my tears are not wasted. To see life as chaptered within eternity is to discover that nothing, neither pain nor delight, neither failure nor triumph, is meaningless. Every line, however obscure, is penned with eternal purpose. It is a strange paradox that when we try to cling to our story as if it were ultimate, we find it slips through our fingers. Yet, when we surrender to God's authorship, we find our story deepens, becoming richer than we could have written ourselves. The hero in a tale does not choose his adventures. They are given. And yet it is in his response, his courage, his hope, his endurance, that the meaning of the story unfolds. So it is with us. Every morning, then, when you wake, you may think of yourself as turning the page. You do not know whether today's passage will contain laughter or lament, whether the ink will be bright or dark. But you do know this: the story belongs to God, and his ending is not in doubt. If we are indeed characters in God's great story, then it follows that the question of meaning does not rest upon how grand or small our part may appear to us. A single candle in a cathedral may seem of little consequence, and yet when darkness falls, that candle is precisely what draws the eye. Many men and women have lived lives unnoticed by the world. Farmers, mothers, craftsmen, servants. Yet, in the author's book, their obedience, their quiet faithfulness, is written in golden letters. One of the most poisonous lies of our age is that only the famous, the powerful, or the brilliant are writing chapters worth reading. But if the true author is God, then the worth of a chapter lies not in its worldly acclaim, but in its faithfulness to his design. Christ himself spent most of his earthly life in obscurity, working with wood and nails in a small town unknown to the empire. And yet, in that hiddenness was written the prologue to the greatest chapter of all, the redemption of mankind through the cross. Our lives, then, are not measured by the noise they make in history, but by their harmony with the eternal song. A saint who prays in silence, unseen by human eyes, may be shaping the plot more profoundly than a king. The smallest act of love may carry more weight than the grandest monument, for love is the very ink with which the author writes. But here we must confront another question. Why do we often feel so restless in the story we are in? Why do we experience such longings that nothing in this world can satisfy? The answer, I think, is that we were made for the next book. Our hearts are tuned to melodies we have not yet heard in full. Every home we build here feels at some level temporary, because it is. Every love here, though precious, awakens in us the ache for a love beyond all loss. Even beauty, which most nearly arrests us, fades as the moment passes, leaving us hungry for a beauty without shadow or decline. This longing is not a defect, but a clue. The ache is not meant to shame us, but to awaken us. We are like children who, hearing a story read aloud, cannot help but ask, what happens next? The very shape of our desires points beyond the chapter we occupy. We are not misfits in the universe. Rather, we are pilgrims still en route to our true country. If you would understand your present life, then do not read it as the whole book. Read it as a chapter, perhaps even as the introduction. The friendships, the victories, the heartbreaks, the bewilderments, all are being gathered into a unity you cannot yet see. To stop at this life and call it complete would be like closing The Lord of the Rings after the Council of Elrond, and supposing the tale had ended. No, the road stretches on, and the author has more to reveal. Let us therefore not despair when the page we are on seems dark. The story is not finished. Nor should we become prideful when the page glows with happiness, for that too is but a glimpse. The real ending, the great ending, is secure, and it will be more wondrous than any imagination. Oh, if our lives are chapters, then we must remember that no chapter stands alone. Each is connected. Each plays its part in a grand continuity. What I do today, in my small corner of the world, ripples outward into the lives of others, who in turn shape still others, until the whole fabric of history is woven. The story of God's people is not a collection of isolated tales, but one long, flowing narrative. From Abraham's faith to Mary's yes, from Peter's stumbling steps to the martyr's unwavering witness, the ink of grace has been moving steadily forward, and you and I, here and now, are not footnotes. We are participants. Think of the Bible itself, not as a dusty anthology, but as the author's earlier chapters. Genesis was the beginning of the plot, the laying down of characters and themes. The Gospels are the climax, the turning point where the hero himself enters the stage. And Revelation is but the foreshadowing of the finale yet to be unveiled. We are not merely readers of this book, we are written into it. The same God who guided Abraham's journey and David's Psalms is shaping the story of your Monday mornings and mine. This truth reshapes how we see even the mundane. A conversation with a neighbor, an act of honesty in the workplace, a moment of kindness to a stranger, all are sentences in the divine novel. We often think the big events are where God works, but the author delights in the details. What appears to us as a passing line may be, in his design, the hinge upon which a whole subplot turns. Yet, if we are honest, we often wish to seize the pen from his hand. We imagine ourselves better suited to writing the plot. But have you ever tried to tell a story while standing inside it? A character cannot comprehend the whole. He can only trust that the author does. To demand the ending now is to rob the story of its very meaning. Faith is, in large part, the willingness to keep reading when the chapter grows dark, trusting that the light will break on the next page. And so, each season of our lives must then be embraced as necessary. Childhood with its wonder, youth with its passion, maturity with its responsibilities, and old age with its wisdom. All these are chapters meant to prepare us for what is to come. Even death, which seems like the final word, is but the turning of a page. For the author has promised that after this shadowed life comes a dawn where every chapter will be better than the one before. I confess that I find this vision not only consoling, but thrilling, for it means that the best is never behind us, but always ahead. Even our dearest memories, sweet as they are not the climax, but the foreshadowing of greater joys. The feast is not in the preface, but in the final act. Thus, we may walk through life with both humility and courage. Humility, knowing we are not the author, and courage, knowing we are in his story. And in the end, when the last earthly page is turned, we shall discover not that our story is over, but that the great story, of which ours was only the faintest beginning, has at last truly begun. When we awaken to the truth that our present life is but a chapter, we also awaken to a profound freedom. The weight of the world, the burden of making our own story eternal, slips from our shoulders. We need not carve our names upon stone monuments, for we are already engraved upon the author's heart. We need not panic when our plans unravel, for the story was never ours to govern. What freedom there is in knowing that the meaning of our lives does not rest upon our fragile pens, but upon his unshakable authorship. This freedom does not make us careless. It makes us courageous. If I know the ending is secure, then I may take risks in the present. I may love more generously, give more freely, endure more faithfully, for I cannot ultimately lose what is written in heaven's ink. The martyr who sings while flames rise around him, the mother who chooses sacrifice for her child, the man who forgives his enemy, all of them act from the certainty that the author's promise is more solid than the passing moment of pain. There is, too, a sweet humility in this vision. We are not the heroes of every tale. Sometimes we are called to be supporting characters, guides, encouragers, givers of quiet light. And perhaps that is the greater glory, for in God's story, even the smallest role, faithfully lived, rings with eternal significance. The angel Gabriel's great announcement to Mary could not have come without Mary's silent, "Let it be." The resurrection joy could not have burst forth without Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. No act of faith is wasted, no chapter forgotten. You and I, then, must learn to read our days with new eyes. When the morning begins, we may ask, "What line will I be called to live today?" When the evening comes, we may rest knowing that whether our lines were triumphant or trembling, they are safe in the hands of the one who writes without error. And here lies the most astonishing truth. In the world to come, we shall not only read the great story, but we shall find ourselves inside it still. Every tear redeemed, every joy fulfilled, every longing met in ways we could not imagine. The great story will not grow dull, for it is not static, but ever deepening. Each chapter will be more radiant, more filled with love, more alive than the one before. And we shall say, at every step, "I have never known such joy, yet greater joy still awaits." This is the hope that steadies us. This is the promise that transforms both our laughter and our lament. And this is the truth that whispers, even in the shadows of death, the story has only just begun. If our lives are only chapters, then eternity must be seen as the true unfolding of the plot. The danger of forgetting this is that we become disillusioned when the present page fails to satisfy us. Have you not noticed how often men and women try to wring from this life more than it can give? They demand from romance a permanence it cannot hold, from success a glory it cannot sustain, from possessions a comfort they cannot bestow. It is like asking the preface of a book to deliver the full delight of the ending. It cannot, because it was never meant to. This explains that peculiar ache within us, that homesickness we carry even in our happiest hours. When we taste beauty, when we embrace love, when we are swept up in joy, we always wish the moment could last forever. But it fades, and we are left with longing. This longing, far from being a cruel trick, is the very clue the author gives us. It is his way of telling us, you were made for the next book, not this one. The shadow does not deceive us. It directs us. The fragrance of a meal awakens hunger, but it is not itself the feast. Think of the most beautiful moments of your life, sunsets that silenced you, friendships that warmed you, music that lifted you beyond yourself. All of these are not the destination, but the signposts. They tell you what kind of world lies ahead. They are like words whispered through the keyhole of a locked door, giving us the certainty that behind it there is a banquet, a fire, and a company of friends waiting to welcome us in. But how do we live in the meantime knowing this? We live as readers who trust the author. We live by faith, not by sight. which means we hold the present lightly and the eternal tightly. It means that though sorrow may visit, we do not despair. Though joy may sparkle, we do not idolize it. Both joy and sorrow are chapters, not conclusions. And in both, God is near, weaving His purposes into every line. Even our failures, written into the book, are not wasted. The author is so great that he can turn even the crooked lines of our sin into a story of redemption. What we thought would be the ruin of the chapter becomes, in His hands, the place of new beginnings. The cross itself, the darkest stroke of ink in human history, became the turning point of the entire plot, the very door through which eternal life was written for us all. If He can redeem that, then He can redeem anything. Thus, we can say with confidence, no page of our lives, however dark, is beyond His power to rewrite into glory. If the author can turn even tragedy into triumph, then we must learn to read our lives backward as well as forward. What I mean is this: when we look upon the past, we often see only fragments, mistakes, regrets, fleeting joys. But in God's time, He will reveal how each piece was fitted into a larger design. We are like travelers climbing a mountain, staring only at the rocky path beneath our feet. But one day, when we have reached the summit, we shall look back and see the winding trail, and it will all make sense. What once appeared senseless detours will be revealed as necessary turns. Indeed, some of the most painful pages of our story may, in hindsight, shine the brightest. For it is often through suffering that love deepens, through weakness that faith grows, and through loss that hope anchors itself in eternity. Pain may seem like a cruel hand tearing at the manuscript, but in the hands of God it becomes the very ink by which a deeper beauty is written. The scars of Christ were not erased in His resurrection, they were transfigured. So too shall our sorrows be, woven into glory we cannot yet imagine. This should stir within us not despair, but courage. If I know that every page is kept by God, then I can endure the shadows without fear. I may walk through dark valleys trusting that the author has not abandoned his book. And if joy visits me, I can receive it as a foretaste of heaven rather than clutching at it desperately. In this way, life becomes not a desperate attempt to write my own ending, but a grateful participation in His. Now, let us consider this final wonder. When at last the earthly volume closes and death turns the page, we will discover not that the story has ended, but that the true story has only just begun. All the best tales we love, those of journeys, of battles fought, of kingdoms restored, are only faint echoes of this. The longing they awaken in us is not for fiction, but for reality. Heaven is not the epilogue, tacked on as a pleasant afterthought. It is the beginning of the book for which every other was only the title page, and in that book every chapter will surpass the one before. Imagine joy not fading, but intensifying, love not threatened by loss, but expanding without limit, beauty not passing, but deepening forever. That is what awaits us. It is what our restless hearts have been hungering for all along. So then, dear friends, live your present chapter with hope. The sentence you write today, by faith, by love, by sacrifice, is not forgotten. it will be read in the light of eternity. And when the final page here is turned, we shall find ourselves standing in the author's presence, and he shall say, "Now the real story begins." One of the most remarkable truths about God's authorship is this: He not only writes the story, but He enters it. This is what sets Christianity apart from every myth and philosophy, that the author became a character within his own book. The Word became flesh. The playwright stepped onto the stage. The eternal author, who once wrote of kings and shepherds, prophets and exiles, wrote himself into the tale as the carpenter's son from Nazareth. Why? Because the story had turned awry. The characters had rebelled against the script. We had scrawled our own words across the page, and the plot had grown dark. But rather than discard his manuscript, God entered it, bearing the full weight of our ruin, and wrote redemption with His own blood. The cross is not a side note. It is the pivot upon which the entire story turns. Without it, the tale collapses into despair. With it, every broken line can be rewritten. Think of it. The author knows what it is to suffer hunger, to taste betrayal, to endure death. No other story has such a God. And because He walked into the darkest chapter, we may be sure that no darkness of ours is beyond His reach. This gives us the boldness to live our present pages not with fear, but with a steadfast trust. It also changes how we view others in the story. Every person you meet, be they friend or stranger, beggar or king, is not merely a passer-by in your tale, but a character beloved of the same author. You cannot know what part they play in the great narrative, nor how your own words or deeds may alter the shape of their chapter. A kind word, a patient silence, a moment of grace. These are the seeds that may blossom into eternal paragraphs in the story of another's soul. This is why no act of love is wasted. No prayer, however faltering, vanishes. No sacrifice, however hidden, is forgotten. All are gathered into the great story which the author is weaving toward its final glory. And when at last we see Him face to face, the veil shall lift, and we shall recognize not only our own story, but the way it has been bound together with countless others into one vast, luminous book, the Book of Life. And we will rejoice to see that all the chapters, even those we once despised, were essential, and that the ending is greater than we dared hope. For then the author himself will read aloud, and his words will not merely be heard, but lived, and every longing will find its fulfillment in him. When the author at last gathers his children home, what shall we find? Not a dull monotony, as some fear, nor a vague, ghostly existence, but the beginning of life, as it was always meant to be. All that we love in this world, the beauty of fields and mountains, the laughter of friendship, the wonder of discovery, will not be erased, but transfigured. Earthly joys are like sketches in charcoal. In heaven, the same lines will blaze in color and light. I sometimes think we will be astonished at how familiar heaven feels, and yet how entirely new, for all along our best moments here were faint reflections of a greater country. Every act of kindness, every melody, every taste of joy was a window opening for a second onto that true land. We mistook them for the destination, but they were always road signs pointing beyond. When at last we arrive, we will see the meaning of every signpost, and we will say, "Ah, so that is what it was for." But eternity will not be the closing of the book, as though all were finished and put upon a shelf. Rather, it will be the beginning of the book in which every chapter is richer than the last, and yet none will ever end. Each day will bring fresh discoveries of God's glory, each chapter a deeper delight in His love. We will never come to the end, for there is no end to Him. To be in His presence is to be always arriving, always beginning anew, always moving further up and further in. This is why we must not despair at the brevity of our earthly lives. Compared with eternity, they are but the prologue. A child reading only the title page would not suppose that the story is over. He would know that the adventure is still to come. So it is with us. The brevity of life is not a tragedy, but a reminder. The true tale has yet to unfold. And so, dear friends, live your present chapter with faith. Do not clutch at it as though it were all, nor despise it as though it were nothing. It is both smaller and greater than you think. Smaller because it is not the whole. Greater because it is part of God's eternal masterpiece. To trust this is to walk with hope. To live, this is to shine with courage. And to die in this faith is not to close the book, but to turn the page and step at last into the story for which all others were only a shadow. And so we come to the final thought, though never to the final word. For one cannot truly end when speaking of the great story, because its ending is endless. Yet it is fitting that we pause here and gather what has been said. Our lives, brief and fragile though they seem, are not accidents scribbled in the margins of the universe. They are chapters in a book written before the foundation of the world, chapters held in the hands of an author who is at once infinitely wise and infinitely good. To believe this is to be delivered from despair, for it means that nothing is wasted, no joy too fleeting, no tear too hidden, no labor too obscure. All are gathered into His design, to be revealed in time as necessary strokes in a masterpiece. It also delivers us from pride, for the story is not ours to control. We are not the center of the narrative. Christ is. And yet, paradoxically, this makes our lives more meaningful, not less. For to play even the smallest part in His eternal drama is of greater worth than to be the star of our own fleeting play. The candle that burns unnoticed in a quiet chapel participates more truly in the light than the grandest torch carried in a parade. When I imagine the day when the author shall bring us to Himself, I do not see a library where the book is closed and stored upon the shelf. No, I see the doors of eternity thrown open and the characters stepping into the real tale at last. This life, with all its struggles and beauties, was only the title page. The story itself is yet to begin, and we shall find, as the old tale once suggested, that every chapter is better than the one before, because each is nearer to the inexhaustible fountain of God's own being. What then should we do while we are still here, still turning the fragile pages of time? We must live faithfully, courageously, with eyes fixed on the author rather than the shadows. We must remember that every moment of kindness, every prayer whispered in the dark, every choice to love rather than hate, is part of a chapter whose meaning we cannot yet see. And when the page seems too heavy with sorrow, we must remind ourselves, the book is not finished, and the ending is sure. My dear friends, I leave you with this. When next you feel the pang of longing, when joy slips from your grasp too quickly, when grief threatens to overwhelm, lift your eyes and remember, you are still in the middle of the story. The chapter is not the whole. The shadows are not the sun. The author is faithful, and he writes with eternity in mind. And one day, when we step across that final threshold, we shall hear him say, "Well done," and find that all along our lives were but the first lines of a tale without end, a tale in which every sorrow is redeemed, every joy fulfilled, and every heart finally at home. So, if these reflections have spoken to you, if you have found hope or comfort, or even the stirrings of longing for that great story, then I invite you, like this message, share it with others, leave your thoughts in the comments, and do subscribe to our channel, so that together we may keep turning these pages of truth until the day the author himself turns the final one.